You know, despite denying it for a number of months, we now know that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invited a former Nazi into the House of Commons. You may remember when 98-year-old Jaroslav Hunka, who fought with a Nazi unit during the Second World War, was invited to Parliament and honored with a standing ovation along with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and columnist for the Sun newspapers, Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, House Speaker Anthony Rota lost his job over this. Will the Prime Minister face any consequences?
I'm not sure this man faces consequences for anything. I'm not sure he ever has. Eventually, he'll lose his job in an election, is about the only thing that might happen. But you're right. Anthony Rota was forced out of his job. Liberals said, well, you invited this man. We can't have you as our speaker anymore. MPs decided he had to go. Is anyone going to suggest that with the Prime Minister? No, they're still out there busy trying to sell the idea that the Conservatives don't support Ukraine as much as they do. And that move, which has been going on for the last several months, all comes back to the sting they received over this issue. And you remember back at the time, the Prime Minister's office denied up and down, sideways, and back and forth that they ever invited this man, that the protocol office had anything to do with it. And now we can see in black and white that they did extend an invitation. Now, it was to a different event. It was to what ended up being a Liberal rally featuring Volodymyr Zelensky at Toronto's Fort York Armories, but they invited him nonetheless. So what's frustrating to me, Hal, is that Justin Trudeau doesn't hold himself to his own standards. As the old saying goes, if they didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any.
Now, it's interesting, Brian. This news comes days after a secret report from the 1980s on Nazis in Canada showed that his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, argued to keep a Nazi war criminal here in Canada?
Yeah, this was a man just identified as F, I believe is the letter that they assigned him in the report. And he'd been convicted in absentia in Riga, Latvia, part of the Soviet Union at that time. I believe 1965, he was convicted in absentia for being responsible for the deaths of more than 5,000 Jews in a firing squad situation. So they convicted him. They wanted him extradited to face justice, and the Trudeau government refused. They said, "No, we're not going to do this." Well, actually, it was the Pearson government. My apologies. Pierre Trudeau at the time was Lester Pearson's justice minister. And he argued against it, not just from a legal, but a moral and political standpoint, saying that, well, just because he was like that before doesn't mean he's like that now. It was a shocking revelation, quite frankly. And, you know, if his name weren't Trudeau, he'd be canceled already. The number of times that this man has been found to be on the wrong side of history, any other name, they'd be pulling it off of the side of buildings, off of street signs, off of airports. They'd be renaming the mountain name for him. But he's a Trudeau. Like his son, he can do no wrong, and he gets away with everything because the Laurentian elite in this country revere him so.
Isn't the Trudeau name almost like the Kennedy name? It's like political royalty here in Canada?
Sadly so.
Yeah. Now, as federal parties argue, Brian, over which one really supports Ukraine, you recently got a hold of a letter where Ukraine asked for 83,000 surplus rockets, but there was simply no response from the Trudeau government. Do we know why not?
Well, so since the story came out, the Trudeau government has said, well, we're testing to find out. But this letter was sent at the end of November. These rockets are sitting in a munitions warehouse in Dunder in Saskatchewan. That's about 45 minutes south of Saskatoon. They are older rockets. They were considered the best in their day when they were in use, but they're older rockets that were scheduled for decommissioning. To decommission them would cost us millions of dollars, hiring a company to take them apart, make them inert, make sure they're not a danger to anyone. So this is a smart move by the Ukrainians. They know that in many Western countries, and Canada is no different, there is a bit of a donor fatigue of people saying, well, you're giving them too much. You're giving them all these things. This is stuff we are never going to use. So it was very smart of them to ask for it. And the letter that I received from General Budanov, the head of their defense intelligence, it showed that they understood that many of these rockets would not be in workable use, that many of them would be duds. But they said they believe they have the tools and the skill to put them together. They assembled a task force and they were going to be working with the manufacturer. So, these should have been on a plane already. But like the air defense system we promised them, it's gone nowhere. So after, this report came out, the Trudeau government came back and said, well, we're actually in the middle of testing them at CFB Dunder, and we're trying to see if they can be safely shipped. That's fine, but you had months to respond. And instead, the initial response was, this is a fake letter. No request has been made. No, it has. Here's the letter.
Brian, there are some who are saying that Justin Trudeau should not be campaigning against Donald Trump versus going head-to-head with Pierre Poilievre. They're saying it's a really bad idea. Who's saying this and why?
So it's funny. I've been saying this for some time that this is a bad idea, and pointing out that this is Trudeau's major push. He's got a lot of other small little things, like, as I've just mentioned, saying he doesn't support Ukraine, trying to erode his support in Ukrainian Canadian community, or saying he is despises Quebecers, things like that. Stuff that's not true. But this going after Donald Trump, it has become something that everyone's noticing. And so the first person that I saw mention it was saying it's a bad idea was David McNaughton. He was Trudeau's campaign co-chair in 2015 for the Ontario campaign. Longtime Liberal. Trudeau later appointed him to be Canada's ambassador to Washington. The other was Louise Blais. She was Canada's consul general in the southwestern states at the beginning of the Trump administration, and was later appointed as Canada's ambassador to the UN. So these are two heavy hitters in liberal circles, in diplomatic circles as well. And David McNaughton asked, why would you risk it? Because it does look like Donald Trump has a very good shot of winning the White House. Right now, he's ahead in polls nationally, and more importantly, as we've all learned over the past several election cycles, he's ahead in the swing states he needs to win the Electoral College. So campaigning against him is a bad idea. I was interviewing radio host from the US, Glenn Beck, the other day, and I said, what do you think it will be like if Trump wins and Trudeau's still in office? And he said, it will not be a friendly relationship. Donald Trump remembers who his friends are and who they're not. And campaigning to make Donald Trump out to be evil incarnate to score political points at home, first off, it's not working. Secondly, it's bad diplomacy. And remember, Trudeau, he cozies up to dictators. If Trump is back in office, it's because he was democratically elected. If you can cozy up to dictators, suck it up if you don't like the guy. You're going to have to deal with him.
Hey, Brian, let's look at some of the latest polls right now. And they don't paint a pretty picture for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. Does the party, do you think, maybe have time to recover and regain some of its popularity and momentum between now and the next federal election in October of 2025?
Well, between now and October 2025 is several lifetimes in politics. So absolutely, he's got time before then. A couple of scenarios that I'll throw out for you, though. With the Liberals at 24% in the polls, or 25, depending on the poll, you've got the Conservatives up around 40. It's a 15-ish point lead. The Liberals trailing everywhere. Their strongest area is Quebec, and they're in second place there. So they're not in good shape to win. That's why they're campaigning against Trump. They think this is winning strategy. Polling by Abacus data would show otherwise. So the changes to Canada's parliament take place April 22nd. That's when we rejig the number of seats and redistribute. Alberta gets an extra seat. BC gets an extra seat. Actually, I think Alberta gets 3. BC and Ontario get 1. And then some seats in Ontario are moved around to areas that the Liberals will have a hard time winning. So if Trudeau gets any traction between now and April 21st, and he thinks he's got a shot at winning, he might do it, because otherwise there's those 5 extra seats and the 2 that are moved that he's down 7 seats to start with. He might call an election April 21st for June. That's a possibility. I've also heard looking towards next November, just before the US vote, as a possibility. But all of these things are up in the air right now due to polling. And if the polling solidifies in Trudeau's favor, expect him to go. Otherwise, he'll hang on as long as he can, and until well past Jagmeet Singh getting his pension next January.
Brian, our Premier Danielle Smith was in Ottawa recently to set up the new Alberta office. She also made a stop in Toronto talking about business investment. Now, she was asked about the protests surrounding her gender policy. There have been a lot of them in Calgary, Edmonton, even here in Lethbridge. Do you think this could potentially harm her overall message?
It could overshadow as she's trying to tell people, look, Alberta's a great place to invest. I know that she'd love to get companies opening offices out there, but also companies that are in film production going to Alberta. That's something that has The Last of Us really put
Yep.
Alberta on the map lately for that,
Mhm.
and they'd like to get more film production, more TV production. Well, that becomes a tough sell with that industry, given the pronouns issue. Um, I think most Canadians are on her side, but that's what the polling would indicate. But the protests and the noise and the portrayal in the media could definitely hurt her as she's trying to sell Alberta as a place to invest.
Yeah, I remember when they shot Superman in my hometown of Calgary. Christopher Reeve, I thought that was pretty cool. It's like, hey, I recognize those buildings. That was pretty cool. Many, many years ago, Brian, a lifetime ago. Brian, Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas challenged CBC CEO Catherine Tate last week on the issue of bonuses, and some pretty healthy bonuses. Is CBC really going to pay bonuses to executives as they lay off hundreds of staff?
Well, unless the heritage minister steps in and says smarten up, I would say the answer is yes. But of course, Catherine Tate didn't just push back against Rachel Thomas's questions, which were excellent, by the way. She lectured MPs. I mean, here's the thing you got to remember. Rachel Thomas was the lead off for questioning, but as it went around the table, every single MP from every single party was outraged at this idea. Wait a minute, you're cutting 800 jobs and you're going to give executive bonuses, which last year, the last time they handed them out, worked out to about $18,000 each. Some of them are going to be bigger than that. So every single MP is saying they don't like this idea. She knows this, and Tate lectures them and says, we don't give out bonuses. We have at risk pay. Well, what's that called? A bonus. So she said that it was a vital part of their pay package, that they hadn't made a decision. They'd make it at the end of the year, and it would be based on performance. As Rachel Thomas pointed out, as several others pointed out, your performance is pretty bad. The audience for CBC TV cut in half over the last several years, and people simply don't trust them on the news side anymore. So I don't know why you're getting bonuses. Besides, you're a taxpayer funded organization that's always saying you don't have enough money. Why are you handing out $16 million in bonuses?
I think what really hurt the CBC over the years was cutting Hockey Night in Canada. I think what Sportsnet's covering it now, so they had a big audience with Hockey Night in Canada. Remember, for many years.
Yeah, that was the only show over the last bunch of years of me covering it that would regularly show up in the top 30 for ratings. Occasionally, the National would if it followed a big playoff game.
Wow. Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us once again today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.